So I'm going to bring up two amazing people. The first is Carrie Mae Weems, who was born on the West Coast, and we claim her as such. Won a MacArthur Fellowship in 2013, had a 30-year retrospective at the Guggenheim in 2014, and she's here right now. Y'all, please, we can do the Wikipedia thing, but we don't have much time. Please give it up for Carrie Mae Weems.
Thank you. Thank you. Hi. Hello. Oh. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. A deep honor and a pleasure, a privilege to be here, to be at home. And I'm going to go through some things very, very quickly. So, Deborah, thank you for this amazing opportunity and for all of your words. I am endlessly fascinated with the idea of the role and possibility of culture, and the role and the possibility of culture with and without leadership. I'm really fascinated by the idea that we're in San Francisco in the Bay Area, a place where I grew up, where I became a woman. I like to think of myself as becoming a woman in this place. I moved here when I was 16 years old. It was a very diverse, dynamic, incredible city. And the thing that really sort of strikes me as being rather remarkable at this time is that it seems that social media is being controlled by a number of anti-social entities. I think that that's really quite remarkable. So that across the street, there are people that are making billions of dollars who are really anchored in social media, and yet those dollars don't seem to really filter down where they might be most needed and actually most useful at this historic moment. I think about the work that I'm engaged in, and I'm just going to sort of talk to you about that just a little bit. Because, of course, I've been involved in one way or another in the social. And when Theastra and I talk, I think we'll talk a little bit more about this sort of social engagement, this sort of intersection between art and civic dialogue. So I've been involved in the social for a long time. I realized at a certain moment, for instance, that a part of what made America now, what makes us now America, the shape that it has taken, the dimensions that it has taken on, is precisely in part because of all the assassinations that took place in this country. I think about President Obama, who I think will go down in history close to, if not exceeding, the expectations of who Lincoln was and what Lincoln did for this country. I spoke with my aunt this morning who said, I'm not sure, I don't know yet exactly what he's done, for instance, for black people. And I talked about sort of the laws that have been put in place that will really shape the dimensions and the structure of the country, but that we won't see those things for many years to come. If they are structural changes that are being put in place that will ultimately change the way that we understand and deal with and think about who we are as American citizens. The kind of work that I'm doing and I'm thinking about, not only am I thinking about garden spaces, assassinations and gardens. And then recently, I decided that, I wanted to do a peony, that I thought that people would be able to plant hope in their gardens. And so I named a peony for W.E.B. Du Bois. They're available through White Flower Farms right now and Hollingsworth Farms. So for all of you who are interested in hope, you can plant it in your garden. But some of the more serious work that I do beyond, or I should say not the most serious work, but rather the other work that I do is the work that I've been involved in the last couple of years. And I'm going to sort of rush through some of these slides. I felt that at a certain point as the Joker, because I donned many, many different costumes and I participated in the art of performance in a certain kind of way, which is one of the reasons that we're here in celebration of this sort of extraordinary, not only the 100, but this incredible exhibition that Valerie Cassell Oliver has put together, Radical Presence, was in really thinking about the way in which I work the streets, performed on the streets. And for a while, I decided that I would sell hopes and dreams in a bottle. And so I did that in Harlem. I would set up in Harlem with my bottles, and I would sell them. Beyond that, doing hopes and dreams in a bottle, and these sort of performative acts that I engaged in, humiliating myself, embarrassing myself on a regular basis, was, at a certain point I realized that there was actually a lack of political leadership, and that was really, in some ways, sort of tearing us apart. Leadership that is absolutely essential, absolutely necessary, if we actually are really to advance forward. It's not necessarily a leadership that comes from governments down, but it's a leadership, of course, that grows up from the grassroots, as we know about from the civil rights movement itself. In my neighborhood, I live in perhaps one of the poorest neighborhoods in the United States. I live in Syracuse, New York. And just the other day, in the press, through a series of articles, it was really made known for the first time in a really clear and unmitigated way that my city is one of the poorest cities in the United States, and that economic disparity amongst Black and Latinos is the absolute worst in the United States. I live in upstate New York. So, several years ago, on a very snowy day, I thought, well, I think I'm going to spend the day in bed. I'm going to spend the day in bed. I'm going to drink some coffee and eat popcorn and read the newspaper and watch movies and just sort of have one of those sort of incredible days. So I went to the kitchen and I pulled together the newspaper and my coffee, and I went back and I got in bed and I opened the newspaper, and there was a story about a child who had been killed in gangland murder, an attempted gangland murder. He was caught in a crossfire. And so I immediately got up because I thought, okay, so something has to happen. Something has to happen. I have to do something about this. I have to respond in some kind of way, that I can't let this thing happen and not say anything about it. I have to do something about this. What do I do? What do I do? And so I immediately got up. And I went down to the studio and I started drafting out a series of a sort of a program for myself. And I decided that I would put together lawn signs about the role of the community in its act of social responsibility to its community. That I wanted to speak out in some way against the gangs and the violence that was really destroying and really dismantling and really terrifying our community. Oprah came, a lot of other people came. This was really sort of an amazing moment. And so I started making these lawn signs, matchbook covers, posters and flyers, and I would take them to bodegas. And when I made the lawn signs, people in the neighborhood who saw the signs, for instance, reading, your reckless violence, is in your senseless disregard for our community is destroying us. We won't stand for it. We won't take it. And people came out of their homes. And they took my signs and they said, we're going to put one over here, we're going to put one over there, we're going to put one over here, we're going to put one over there. And they took control of my signs, right? I made a whole, thousands and thousands of matchbook covers matchbook covers, of matchbooks actually, and took them to bars and bodegas and restaurants and cafes throughout the neighborhood. When somebody came in and asked for a match, when somebody came in and asked for, to buy a pack of cigarettes, they would receive one of my matches. Beware the ultimate cost of violence, it may mean your life. Contrary to popular belief, your life does matter. Perpetual peace cannot exist within the context of perpetual whiteness, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, it was like a really sort of a wonderful, wonderful project. And then from there, after sort of figuring out how to do this kind of, this sort of activity called Project Activate on my own, just on my own, with my own dollars, with my own 2 cents, my own 2 nickels to rub together, I thought, okay, now I'm going to do a billboard project. I'll make a billboard project focused both on sort of having the sort of internal dialogue with my community, right? An internal dialogue with the community, that we are responsible for our own community, calling it out, because I thought that was absolutely, absolutely essential at that moment. I was heartbroken. I was devastated by the loss of this child. I thought that if I didn't get my black ass up out of my bed and do something, that I was as much as the problem as anybody else. I had to make some sort of an action. And so then I figured out how to do a series of billboards, which was also really important. And I did them around the sort of perimeter of this neighborhood. It was absolutely fabulous, interesting. Tons of people saw it. Thousands of people saw it. Hundreds of people saw it. I received all kinds of information, documentation, letters, phone calls, emails, etc., from people who had sort of stumbled across this work, this idea of reclaiming our community. And so I went on and on with this, right? On and on with this, sort of speaking both to the perpetrators of violence, to the community itself, and I was deeply anchored in this work for a period of time. I worked on it maybe on my own for about 6 or 7 months of just every day working out a strategy of engagement, of thinking this whole thing through. And then I thought, okay, so I've done that. I thought about this, and then I thought, there are all these interesting projects that are going on around the country. Theaster Gates is doing Dorchester Project. Rick Lowe is doing Project Row House. Projects that are big, projects that are small, projects that are old, 20 and 25 years, projects that are new. What is my place in this, and how do I deal again specifically with my community? So I thought, okay, I'm going to build a safe zone. And so I sent out thousands and thousands and thousands of flyers, and I figured out how to do it through my local newspaper, which is fabulous, so that the Sunday edition of the newspaper, when you got your Sunday paper, you received a copy of my Safe Zone flyer, and that Safe Zone flyer went in the storefronts of restaurants and bars and community groups. It was sort of wonderful. People just sort of embraced it. It was on the back side of it. I think that something happened with my slides. On the back side of this the Safe Zone flyer were a list of social organizations that you could also check into. For unemployment, for domestic violence, just a number of kinds of organizations, that you could call. So then, so I worked on this. I worked on that for, another 6 months. And I'm still thinking about, well, what can I do? What else is needed? Well, one of the things that I thought, okay, is that I need to really sort of engage these young people. I need to engage some of these young people, some of these people that are engaged in violence. I need to sort of pull them into me, towards me. And so then I developed a little project called the Institute of Sound and Style. I thought, well, like me, kids pretty much, for the most part, are interested in sex. They're interested in sex and fashion. They're interested in sex, fashion, and music. So we developed this, I developed this institute. It's called the Institute of Sound and Style. And we bring together about 25 kids per year during the summer. And we teach them, we train them in all these levels of the arts. That not all of you will be rappers, right? But you can be a designer. You can learn to make video. You can learn to make photographs. You can learn graphics. You can learn design. You can learn sound engineering, right? And so we partnered with a whole group of very interesting people, and we started the Institute of Sound and Style. And Sound and Style now has been going for 4 years. One of the important things was that I knew that, these kids who were involved with me, well, they needed money. They just couldn't be there training, but they actually needed to make a living. That's one of the reasons that these kids are on the streets and involved in street violence and gangs, of course, is all really based on a certain kind of economy, the street economy. So making sure that these kids were paid was a very important part of our project. So we started paying them minimum wage. For the first year, like the Astor, I would sell a piece of work, and then that work would become the foundation for paying my kids the minimum wage. And then the next year, I partnered with the city, and the city began to pay a certain part of that minimum wage for me so that my kids were always paid. And now, this year, I'm really very, very focused on not only doing this which was one of my dreams, was not that it would be simply a summer program, but that it would be an ongoing vocational program that would happen throughout the course of the year. We know that there are 2.5 million Black men incarcerated right now. And in the next few years, as the state and the government, the corporate state, has come to realize that they have really built a monster, a behemoth that it cannot support, that thousands upon thousands upon thousands of those men will be leaving prison in the next few years. That current debate that we are hearing, the sort of escalation in hearing this idea about the incarcerated and the problem of incarceration is falling really upon the shoulders of artists and community organizations to figure out. The state has said, we don't know what to do. We can't figure it out. We're going to leave it in the hands of the artists and those entities to do. I think that might be a mistake in some ways, but I also think that there can be resolve as well. And so to that extent, my small, tiny little project is focused on how do we aid these young men primarily, and some young women as well, to sort of shore themselves up against the coming of that tide. How to simply fashion a world where they are, in fact, important, that they understand that contrary to popular belief, their life does matter. Thank you.